Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Barry Merrick. I'm co-founder and CEO at Ivy. I'm the chapter chair of YPO Metro New York, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce all of you to Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman. Scott, welcome. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm great, Barry. It's so great to be here today, man. It's so much fun.
It's so good to have you. Thank you for that wonderful performance. Want to
You
just
could see that?
it was amazing. Yeah, we
I
loved
was
it.
my camera was on.
You're a
I'm
star now.
joking.
This will go viral.
I'm joking. I knew.
So happy to have you here. So happy to have everyone joining us across the world for this truly profound conversation we're going to have on how we can all master the new science of self-actualization. As many of us already know, Scott is truly like the ideal guide for this conversation. He is a humanistic psychologist who's exploring the depths of human potential. He hosts the number one psychology podcast in the world, which is called the Psychology Podcast. And he is the author or editor of 9 books, including his latest, which is called Transcend. So highly recommend you checking it out. He has taught courses in intelligence, creativity, and well-being at Columbia, NYU, UPenn, and many other places. And he was also named one of the 50 most groundbreaking scientists who are changing the way that we see the world by Business Insider. So Scott, it's so good to have you. Our topic is a huge one, right? Everything we do in our community is to explore how do we unlock our potential. And I know your mission is exactly the same. So tell us about the vision for this book after your decades of work and all the amazing people you've hosted. Tell us why you wrote this, what's your vision for it, and what's the change you want to see in the world?
Absolutely. Well, there's a progression there of my research interests, and now looking back on, I see it's a natural progression. But you very rarely, because we don't have free will, we rarely know what's what the larger story is until we look back on it later in our lives. But I first started really interested in intelligence. And growing up with a kid, I was a kid with a learning disability, an auditory learning disability as a kid. I was always curious why people didn't see greater potential in my friends, in me. I felt like I was capable of more than my teachers gave me credit for, and it was always very confusing to me. And so I got into the intelligence research field, and my first book was on my first book for the general audience was on an education system that had a broader definition of intelligence. But then I realized that intelligence wasn't exactly it, and I got bored with intelligence a little bit. I realized creativity. I was like, oh, creativity, that's really where it's at. I just studied creativity and what is the creative mind? What's different about the creative mind from the not creative mind? Um, and then after that research, I realized, well, there's still something higher. I'm always trying to reach to higher reaches of human nature. And after creativity, I was teaching a course at University of Pennsylvania. Angela Duckworth had been teaching this course on positive psychology, and she had to work on her. She wanted to work on her book Grit, and she asked me, "Would you teach my course while I work on my book Grit?" And of course, I said yes. You don't say no to something like that. And I loved it. And I was researching for that class. I discovered the humanistic psychology movement in the 50s and 60s as the real original positive psychologists. They're not real. They're the ones today are real, but usually I'm saying the positive psychologists, the origin story of positive psychology. Abraham Maslow, and the idea that there's a lot of positive human potential that psychologists have been ignoring. And then I was like, aha, like what I'm really interested in is human potential. And it only took me 20 years to come to that realization. A little slow in the uptake with that one, um, but intelligence, creativity, and then just more broadly human potential. What could we be as a species? Not so focused on what we are. Because if you just focus on what we are, it might not give you much hope for the future of humanity. But if you always look at every human in front of you and you say, what could this person be? You can bring out much higher, better outcomes in the person. So that's just a basic. I wanted to just kind of give you kind of a historical progression of my research interests.
Yeah, beautifully put, Scott. And what a journey you've had. So you've been on this exploration, this voyage,
My whole
right?
life,
And
my whole
yeah,
life. Yeah.
it's amazing. And what I'd love to do is maybe before we go into the frameworks you've developed through this journey and you've crystallized in this book, let's really focus on like what do people get wrong, right? Like what are the pitfalls or the myths when it comes to human potential, what people believe about themselves or others or humanity at large. You already mentioned one, which is like, we treat maybe people too much as they are as opposed to what they could be. But tell us about like, if you were to narrow it to the fewest number of critical kind of factors that lead us to sometimes get this wrong or have a misperception about it.
Well, there's a very well, first of all, there's this misconception that you can't self-actualize or even begin to self-actualize unless you've had every single one of your basic needs met perfectly. You know, there's this idea that that Maslow drew a pyramid. It turns out Maslow never drew a pyramid. You know, many people may have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but when I was researching my book and I was reading his personal journals and I went into his personal correspondences and I basically learned more about Maslow than anyone on the planet cares to know about Maslow. I was like, where's the pyramid? He actually conceptualized self-actualization and the hierarchy of needs of human potential, not as a step-lock progression where you reach one level of like, it's life is not like a video game is how I like to put it. It's not like you reach one level of needs, like connection, and then you reach enough of it, and then some voice from above is like, congrats, you've unlocked self-esteem, and then you can like move up to the next level, and then you never have to worry about connection again. We're always in a state of some needs partially fulfilled and some needs partially unfulfilled. Always. There's It's a never ending journey. I think life is more of as opposed to a pyramid or a mountain to climb on the way to the top. It's more of an experience, like a sailboat. So I have a new metaphor for human potential, and hierarchy of human needs that I think is more in line with Maslow's thinking about the topic, but I think it's also more in line with the latest science of human potential of as a sailboat. And I can go into that if you want, but I like to
Excellent.
stop every now
Yeah.
and then. I like to stop talking every now and then.
No, this is great. So let's dive straight in there. So what you're saying here is that it's this journey that you don't need all the needs fulfilled to achieve that, like the pinnacle of self-actualization. Share with us, your framework that you've developed. Give us first a bird's eye view of what it looks like. What are the key ingredients? And then we'll take them in turn to explore, well, what can we do about each of those things in our lives, in our organizations, and so forth.
Sure, sounds good. By the way, it's so exciting to see so many people here from so many different uh, geographic locations around the world. That is really exciting. And I also wanted to encourage people to comment, whatever I'm saying or you're saying. If someone wants to react to something other than just telling us where they're from, please feel free to say more, about your thoughts, and we can try to respond to it. So the hierarchy, the way I like to view the sailboat metaphor is that you have a boat, and you have the sail, the two main components of a sailboat. If you have too many holes in the boat, of course you're not going to go anywhere. If you have water coming in and your main priority is getting rid of the water so you don't sink, of course that's going to put a damper on your self-actualization, to put it mildly. But is if we have a boat that's secure and safe, that alone is not enough. That won't allow us to move. We eventually have to open up the sail to go anywhere, and that requires being vulnerable to the potential winds and inevitable waves that can come crashing down on us at any moment. You have to move with intention in a vast unknown of a sea, in your most valued direction, with full awareness. And I hate to bring this up because it puts a damper on things always, that you're going to die someday, that there are existential threats at everywhere you look. There, as well as threats to your ego, as well as threats. There's lots of threats to everything, not just existentially, but also threats to connection, moments you can be lonely, right? Moments where you may feel insecure, environments where you feel insecure, but you still have to open that sail and move with a spirit of exploration, love, and purpose. And I argue that when you're really moving with those three needs being satisfied of growth, those are the needs of growth, then we can really experience these peak experiences in our lives that come along for the ride. They come along for the ride of the sailboat, experience. They're not things that you wake up in the morning and you try to force yourself. Today I'm gonna have a peak experience. Good luck, anyone in this room who thinks they can just press a button in their head. I mean, LSD does exist. That's true. That's true. But I'm talking about from non-pharmaceutical methods. Um, you know, really authentic peak experiences that you have that have come along for the ride of a conscious state that you're in. So this is the basic foundational framework of the sailboat, and let's unpack. Do you want to unpack the different parts of the sailboat?
Yeah, let's do it. I think what would be great is, I mean, so far, basically what you're saying is, of course, if there's holes and you're going to sink, you got to fix the holes. But from there, you got to have this mindset of exploration, love, on purpose. In your book, you specifically divided the formula. Okay, amazing. Hopefully everybody can see that. So tell us about,
You know what?
take us
I'm going to
through
put
the,
in the chat box. I'm going to put in the chat box the picture so we can all be on the same page at the same time. I want us all to be on the same page of the same part of the sailboat. So I'll put a link in the chat box.
okay,
Okay.
perfect. Thank you for that. And for everybody watching the recording, we'll include a link also in the description. Let me know, Scott, once you've done it.
I've done it.
Okay, thank you for that. So yeah, take us maybe like before we dive all the way through it, just share with us like what are the key components here. I know in the book you divided into security, growth, and so forth. And then I'd love to like take each one to see what we can do for each one.
So at the very base of the boat, we have security needs, needs for a sense of coherence in our environment. It turns out the psychologists have discovered there are three different meanings of the word meaning. Process that one, but not all forms of meaning are just purpose. This kind of grandiose, future-oriented more form of meaning. There's a form of meaning called coherence, which I tie to that need for safety, which is, does your immediate environment make sense? Is there so much unpredictability and harshness in your environment that it's just nothing makes sense? There's no meaning in your immediate environment. And that can have very detrimental effects on the system of a cybernetic. All of us, we're cybernetic systems, we're which that just simply means we have goals. We have a vision of a future goal, and we have an idea of the starting state and the end state of what it would take us to transform our lives so that we can reach that goal. But when you have so much unpredictability in your environment, to put it lightly, that puts a damper on our goal attainment, our long-term future goal attainment. So that's safety, food, water, shelter, all that stuff that Maslow talked about, but just in general predictability. And then connection is also part of that boat. If you don't feel a sense of connection, don't you feel groundless? Have you ever been in an environment where you felt unwelcome? Maybe you haven't, but a lot of
Yeah,
people, I mean, have you?
course.
Maybe you have,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, you're such a cool dude. I can't, hard to imagine that anyone would not want you to be part of their thing. But, I think we all from time to time have felt that experience of feeling like we don't belong. And that can really make us feel groundless all of a sudden, like there's no bottom, there's no boat, there anymore. We don't feel secure. And then also a part of the boat is self-esteem. And I make it clear that there's a healthy self-esteem. So I distinguish, and I've done a lot of research on narcissism and how that's different than self-esteem. They're different things. And a healthy self-esteem that's secure is one where you don't always get your validation from others. See, narcissists their drug is validation from others. But when you have a healthy self-esteem, you don't need drugs. You don't need drugs at all. It comes from within. You know, this sort of sense of validation is something that you feel you're worthy enough as it is, and you feel you're competent enough as it is. And lastly, I didn't make the distinction in the need for connection. I distinguished the need for belonging from the need for intimacy. And I tease those two things apart. They both make up the need for connection, but there's lots of situations where we may feel like we belong in an environment, but we don't feel like there's a relationship there at all. And it could be very tenuous kind of belonging. A lot of people may join a extremist organization or a political organization, religious, a group where they feel they belong. But do you really feel like you have a like that the person really they really care about you as a whole person? You know, test that and disagree with their main tenet, you know, for 1 second and see how much they still show love to you. You see what I'm saying? So a real relationship is one where there's unconditional positive regard, as my homeboy Carl Rogers put it. I love Carl Rogers. I love him. Yeah.
Excellent. So that's the base of the boat, right? So we've got the security made up of the safety, predictability, connection, healthy self-esteem. And then from there, you've got the next part. So that's the sail, the growth. Tell us about the components of that a little more.
Yeah, so growth consists of as base. You kind of view them as two mini hierarchies, you know. Whereas the kind of base of a boat is is a safety and avoidance of fear. The base of the sail, once you open up the sail and move with that foundation, is exploration, spirit of exploration. And that incorporates, I have 6 sub needs of exploration. So it starts getting really nerdy fast, gets nerdy fast, but or just nuanced fast. But you have various sub needs of exploration, or things like adventure seeking. Are you an adventure seeker, Barry?
Yeah, I think so. I believe so. Not like just for the kicks, but
Yeah.
definitely in terms of
Well,
how
you're not
I
a
enjoy
thrill
my life.
seeker,
Right.
but you're an adventure seeker.
That's right. Big time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's one subject, but also social exploration is a form of exploration where you're just curious about people, right? Like that's why I do my podcast. Bring it. Yeah, I don't care who you are. Like, you're fascinating. You know, I may not like you very much, but you're fascinating. You know, and then there are other sub needs. Creativity I include under exploration, openness to experience, intellectual curiosity, those sorts of things. Post-traumatic growth, I include that as a form of exploration. Do you explore your pain and your suffering in your past in a way that helps you grow, or are you stuck in your in your past? And then exploration, we can also talk about love, which is different than connection. I distinguish what Maslow called be love, love for the being of others. You know, to what extent do you yeah, it's kind of like a higher form of spiritual love, kind of like unconditional love. And then if you move with a sense of being love, a sense of exploration, and you add in a little dose of purpose, you add in a dose of, um, uh, you know, the question is how, Scott, how do you define purpose? You know, a good question, a hypothetical person, because purpose is such a loaded word. A lot of my students at Columbia, when I teach them about purpose, I say purpose, some of them break out in hives. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, like, that's a lot of pressure, you know, to figure what is my one thing? What is your one mission? What is your one mission? Tell me, what is your one mission? It can be very exhausting. But what I more modestly just like to think of purpose as, um, you know, what calls you into the future? What sort of need from outside of yourself do you think you can fulfill? What's calling you? And in that way, it relaxes the pressure in a lot of ways on the self when we talk about purpose, because anyone can have a purpose. All that's required is awareness of needs of others. And that's when we start to transcend. Then we get to the transcendence, because transcendence is ultimately about fulfilling the needs of others, not about just fulfilling your basic needs. And so we can start really getting there once we're really moving in the ocean, in a really authentic way.
You put it so beautifully, Scott. So, without any need for taking a break, let's keep going full speed. So, you told us about the security piece, then the growth, spirit of exploration, which is such an amazing way to put it. Tell us, your conception of transcendence, and also how it's distinct than maybe how people who are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, which we learned from you that was never intended to be a pyramid. Tell us about, how you define this, what it actually means, and help us demystify that concept a little bit.
It's such a we talk about purpose being a big word, a loaded word. Tell someone, oh, just go transcend. Oh, what the heck? Transcend. I distinguish in my book between healthy transcendence and unhealthy transcendence. The form of transcendence I talk about in the book is one that's grounded, um, uh, not on a faulty foundation. See, unhealthy transcendence is one that's built on a faulty foundation of a sailboat. That's why it's the whole person that matters. It's the integration of the whole person that matters. You have a lot of people who shoot for transcendence. First of all, some people call it spiritual bypassing. I actually wrote an article recently, a topic I called spiritual narcissism, and you can read that at Scientific American. Maybe you could put that in the link in the chat box. That article might be interesting to people. But there are a lot of people who think that a yoga class will cure their insecurities, or will be the panacea, for all the things that ail them, or people who think a meditation practice will immediately mean they're not mean to their mother anymore. But there are so many ways in which that is a misguided view of spiritual practices. Spiritual practices need to be integrated, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done outside of our spiritual practices to really make sure that integration is really contributing to the world in a positive way. I define healthy transcendence as an emergent property of when our whole self is integrated in a way that's in the service of realizing the good society. That's how I define and view healthy transcendence. And that view of transcendence is not one where we're above others. It's in fact it's less uh, vertical and more horizontal, not a sexual sense, calm down, but in the sense of, that we're more connected to all of humanity as opposed to we're looking down on others. There's a effect that's been found in psychology, the I am enlightened and you're not effect. And that could be very dangerous when you start with that mentality. That's not the mentality that I espouse in my book.
Got it. So let's dive a bit deeper here. So your definition was um, it's an emergent transcendence, emergent property of when our whole is integrated into realizing the good of society.
Correct.
Right. So what are some very practical, actionable ways in which we can kind of work backwards into that, or any exercises, any thought processes that we can go through to really figure out like how our life fits into that?
Well, a lot of it does require a deep self-awareness process. That's why I have lots of personality tests in my book, and you can. So I would say the first step is self-awareness, and I'm putting a link in the chat window where I have a whole bunch of free self-actualization tests that you can take to really understand where you're at on this journey in various ways. I even have a test that can tell you where you are on which side of the force you are on, whether or not you're on the dark side of the force or you're on the light side of the force. I have a scientifically valid test that can tell you that. So that might be interesting to some people in this room. But so many of these kinds of things is knowing, what are your strengths? What are your greatest character strengths? But also not ignoring your weaknesses. Self-honesty is such an important part of this journey, and being aware of your blind spots, being aware of in what ways is, what are your core motivations? So are you motivated for connection because of a desperate need for belonging? Or are you motivated for connection because you want to grow and you want to understand and learn something about another human and about yourself? So really understand your core motivations that underlie a lot of your behaviors. I think every behavior has a B flavor to it and a D flavor to it. Bonus points for anyone who can guess what the D and the B stands for. Okay, anyone in the chat window, first person in the chat window tells me what the D motivation, what the D is and what the B is stands for, and I'll give you something amazing. I'll wait like a couple seconds.
Time to open those sales and take risks, everybody.
I love beneficial and detrimental. Actually, that's not the answer, but I actually kind of love that. Okay, that's okay. I'll tell you. It means I'm teaching something new here today, right, Barry? Isn't this a good sign? Is it a good sign?
Absolutely.
D stands for deficiency. Are you coming from a place of I need this so that it satisfies a hole in my heart, or are you coming from a place of being? The B stands for being. Being. I want to grow as a whole person. I want to enrich my being and enrich my consciousness. And there are two different motivations that can apply to anything. This framework, this D versus B framework, will change the way you see the world forevermore. Because you can either go through life with a lens of deficiency, or you can go through life with a lens of being. When you go through a life of deficiency, nothing is good or bad by itself. I think that humor can have a deficiency flavor or a being flavor to it. I think aggression can, I think Martin Luther King had a being flavor of depression. Not depression, of social justice, of racism, of aggression. It was very growth oriented. I think maybe Malcolm X was demotivated. Maybe one could make that case. But anyway, you can go down the line and you can start to see how anything is not really good or bad by itself. We use lots of words that we treat them like they're good or bad. Compassion, empathy. There's demotivated empathy, folks. There's research showing that empathy can actually lead to political polarization. You can have a lot of empathy for the people in your in group and have a lot of hatred for people in your out group. So none of these things are contextually just good by themselves. And that's why I like to put people within that framework. So I say all of this as laying a foundation for what healthy transcendence really rests on. What foundation does it rest on? Healthy transcendence rests on a being-oriented foundation.
Brilliant.
Is this making any sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what you're saying is, for those who are
Thanks, Pamela. Thanks, Pamela.
For those seeking healthy transcendence, it's really about building your strengths, be honest about your weaknesses, understand your core motivations, and to the extent possible, tilt yourself in the direction of being motivations, as opposed to like things that you're making up for deficiencies, or you have that perspective of like making up for what you lack.
Oh gosh, I'm so sorry, Barry. I've realized I've just been posting all the links to the panelists. And so no, they haven't been getting it. So
we'll repost everything. We'll repost everything to everyone.
Do you promise? Do you pinky swear?
Marilyn is going to do it right now. I pinky swear it. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I really want them to get every single thing that I posted. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
We'll just get them posted very shortly. Okay. Cool. So tell us, this is really powerful. I want to like really figure out, one part of this equation is just being aware of this perspective that you've taken. So just the awareness of it itself can be really helpful if we can keep it forefront of our minds. Are we being deficiency motivated or being motivated? Tell us though, like, what are the kinds of like daily practices or approaches to conversation and everyday life that we can incorporate to really build on this like sailboat metaphor? It's very different, like knowing something. Someone could read this whole book, love it, and so on, but then life happens, and unless you have like the right practices in place to keep it alive, it's difficult to keep
of
a forefront
course.
of mind. So what would you recommend for all of us to
You're right.
do? Yeah.
You're right, because this so much of this is just is a lot of theory. But there's an appendix of my book where I call them growth challenges, and I'm actually working on a follow-up book that'll be just exercises, things. But uh, growth challenges to me are, what are the things that you can do in your daily life to just get you outside your comfort zone. You have to, Abraham Maslow said, you have to choose growth. You can either choose to go, here's the quote. This is my favorite quote of all time. One can choose to go back towards safety or forward toward growth. Growth must be chosen again and again. Fear must be overcome again and again. Don't forget that last part. Fear must be overcome. So there's lots of things. One thing is it's really important to explore your dark side, to explore, to have a meditation practice that allows you to non-judgmentally see yourself for as it truly is. But also really understanding and making a clear understanding of what are your psychological fears that are limiting you, that are holding you back. So that's equally as important as moving towards the positive, is understanding what's holding you back in terms of from a fear perspective. There are lots of things you can do to build high quality connections. Um, uh, you can really try practices of listening respectfully, of increasing your communication skills, making sure that you're understood, making sure your points are understood. These are also deficiencies that are going to be really important and really hold you back from self-actualizing if you don't nip them in the bud. Practicing skills of healthy assertiveness are really important, and I have a really uh, my clients, I do coaching, and my clients, it's really important for them to um, really take responsibility for their needs. So a lot of people don't take responsibility for wanting something, though, because they may lack healthy assertiveness skills, and what they do instead is they blame the world for the problem. They say, well, the world should just magically know what I need and what I want, and everyone's horrible because they don't. That's not the healthiest way of living one's life. May I just say, there's it's much more healthy to go through your life learning the skills. Let me teach you the skills so you feel empowered to know the difference between an aggressive form of assertiveness versus a healthy form of assertiveness, where you state your values and opinions, but you do it in a really um, a way that's in line with your values and goals, doesn't sacrifice your goals, but also respects the other person. I was thinking maybe if I could find an example. Um, there's passive aggressive style that a lot of people have. Um, but all these things kind of just relate to entitlement, and you shouldn't feel entitled to anything. You should feel you're worthy of expressing your goals and self-esteem, but you shouldn't have to feel like you're entitled to this. And a lot of things that hold us back, as you notice, because I don't want to tell all the secrets today, but as you notice, I'm going down a list of things that we should be working on in our daily lives that get in the way. you know I'll leave the other half of just going towards the positive good things for those who want to like read my book or take my course. But there's a lot of things that really can hold us back, and that also we have a lot of cognitive distortions, um, that hold us back. There's so many cognitive distortions. I will actually want to read some to you because um, is anyone in the room is anyone in the room shy when talking to someone cute that they see they want to like pick up or something, like like they like, oh my gosh, that person's so beautiful and I want to talk to them, but you just fall apart because you don't feel like you can do it? Is anyone in the room shy when it comes to that? Because I could connect with that person quickly if they are. Oh, good. Well, that took a lot. I felt like that took a lot of bravery and vulnerability for these people to admit that. So, first of all, you're already on the path of self-actualization if you can respond yes to something like that. But I came up with a list of like 15 cog distortions that get in the way of getting what you really want in even in that domain. So we often may have black and white thinking about the situation. We'll think, oh wow, if I get rejected, that means I'm a total loser in life. We may catastrophize. So we think, wow, if I approach this person I really like, I'm 100% going to get rejected harshly, and everyone will see it, and I'll feel totally humiliated. And the video of this happening will appear on Instagram somewhere, and then my mom will see it, and then dot, dot, dot. You catastrophize it before you even just talk to the person. False sense of hopelessness is a big cognitive distortion. We'll think, oh, there's no point in approaching that person anyway. I'll probably just come across as shady, blah, blah, blah. You're already shooting yourself in the foot of 50 million different ways. Just lead with the core of your being, not your deficiency, the core of your being, and talk to another human being and see what happens. Be curious. That's it. That's all life's about. There's no need to shoot yourself in the foot. So anyway, these are just a little starter pack of things in our lives. There's so many things we don't realize are getting in the way of our self-actualization, that we can make minor tweaks.
Excellent. So you mentioned, these are about overcoming the things holding us back. You did also allude to, so you have a whole set of additional things that are actually activities specifically focused on growth and moving forward. Give us a quick overview of what those are. Obviously, those who want to dive deeper, we're going to have a few minutes at the end for you to share how people can get their heads around, or how they can actually implement these things. What are the resources out there? But what are those, you mentioned the stuff that you haven't had a chance to tell us, just as a highlight.
Once we start diving into the exploration side of things, you start to realize that so many things are things that will get you outside of your comfort zone. Get outside your comfort zone. So let's say you're terrified of public speaking. You really start to engage more in public speaking. You really start to really witness what that is like within your own body when you start to make these changes that get outside your comfort zone. You take up a new creative hobby. You join a new club or something, that social club that allows you to meet new interesting people. I'll do things like I'll go to a goth dance club. I'm just curious, what are these people like? I don't know. Whatever works for you. I find people endlessly fascinating. I also we talk about purpose and knowing your character strengths. So much of it is an act of self-understanding. There's you could take the free character strength survey via I can find that link for you all right now. But a really important exercise along this regard is to take this free assessment of your character strengths. I think this time the attendees did get it. And try to use your character strength, your top 3 character strengths. Maybe it's humor, maybe it's love, whatever it is. But try to find new avenues and ways of using your character strengths. That's what the research shows is really beneficial. Think about domains where maybe you haven't applied your love. Maybe you're always on Twitter and you're always yelling at people you disagree with their political beliefs. Maybe try see what happens if you show them a little bit of your you say you have character strength of love. Your research shows, this test shows you have love. Why don't you maybe exercise it a little more? By the way, Barry, do you know what I'm saying? Do you know how there are people who they preach love every day, but in their actions they're always just yelling at people and who disagree with them? Do you ever see anyone like that?
Yeah, totally. So I guess the main point there is kind of be aware of what your strengths are, but in addition to being aware of them, actually challenge yourself. If 0 to 10 on that strength, where are you in terms of how much you implement it in the real world? And wherever you are, how can you increase that 1 point higher? So I think that's powerful. I'm going to ask you one more quick question, and then we're going to dive into this audience questions, which are great. Everybody participating live, feel free to put in any questions, and Scott and I are going to get through all of them before the time's up. So we're going to do that quickly. Last question from me, Scott. Let's zoom out and transcend a little bit. We did a big overview of the framework, then some action items. Let's really get to how you see the big picture. So what do you, in your personal opinion, having looked at everything, all the people you've met and interviews, what do you find to be the more overall purpose for all of us as humanity. Like we all have our own individual lives that we play our roles, but across the board, what do you think is like the purpose of a human and all of us as a as a species, as like we're on this exploration, we're these sailboats, like you said, we're pretty special, it seems. How do you perceive all of that? Where do you think this is going? What's the greater purpose that you find that you think we should be aiming for?
That's an easy question. Well, I don't think that the question, what is the meaning of life, is really even the right question. You know, or some people might say the question really is, well, what's the meaning of your life? And that's a much more interesting question. But I think that life is something that I think that all misses the point. There is something incredibly miraculous about the fact that we made it here as to exist. There are a lot of sperm that didn't make it into existence, didn't poof into existence, which simply means, what does that mean, poof into existence? Which simply means was given a chance to build a nervous system that was so complex that consciousness would emerge. That's all it means. And that someday that consciousness will disappear. Now we don't know what happens afterwards, but um, with any certainty. But life to me is something to be experienced. Life to me is something that is to be witnessed, to with wonder and a sense of awe. There's so much in life that is awe-inspiring if we can focus, if we can really focus on the beauty of the world and the beauty of others. So many of us get so lost in our deficiencies that we forget there are still possibilities. I know that I had said earlier that one doesn't have to wait until all their basic needs are met before they can self-actualize, and I do believe that. I think that sometimes we can get so stuck in the deficiency realm of human existence that we don't take time for the being realm of human existence. And yeah, I mean, I'll just leave it there.
Excellent. I do think that everything you said, that was very well put. And you did mention earlier on, like your definition of transcendence, when our whole is integrating the realizing the good of society. I thought that was also like a bigger part of the story, like that we're all a part of. There are all these needs out there, and we all have unique gifts to fulfill those needs. So this has been great, Scott. I'm going to dive straight in here, and we'll do these quick fire style because there's quite a few. So the first question is
Really,
from Pamela Seniza. She asks, how do you remedy the unfortunate occurrence of taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back in pursuing growth, i.e., exploring, getting hurt, rejected, expanded, and retreating again?
perhaps it's not something to be remedied. By the way, you can keep the question on the screen, so I can cognitively process it. um,
Sure.
it just disappeared somehow. Okay, but yeah, I think that, like, that's not something to be remedied. I think that's the kind of mindset that is unhealthy for someone, to think of it that way. Because if you think of life that way, then that's almost the perfectionistic mindset. It's like, oh, I'm making all this growth and everything, and then you slip once, and then you beat yourself up over it. If you view that life that way, then a simple remedy is self-compassion. I mean, that's the remedy, because and Chris, and I don't know if this is news to anyone, but Kristen Neff has a whole series of free meditations for self-compassion on her website that are really helpful. It's important to recognize that we all fall flat on our butt, sometimes, and we may strive for growth, but uh, there will be slips because there are so many different competing parts of ourselves. And that's part of what it means to be human. There's a common humanity aspect here, as well as just a recognition of one's in humanity, and imperfections, that one has to take as an assumption, a starting assumption, in order to get back on the horse. Um, the good news is that you can choose growth no matter how many times you fall on your butt. You can choose growth again. You can, and that's what um, that in a lot of ways, you know, that's what makes you an intentional agent in the world. That's what allows you to be the author of your own life. Is that ability to make that decision at any time. So self-compassion and realizing that you can make that choice no matter how many times you've fallen flat. There's never, yeah, I'll stop there.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Scott. And great question, Pamela.
Thanks, Pamela. Yeah.
Next one from Sharon Leviton. She asks, when at a junction in life when we know it is time to change direction, change purpose, how do we shed the habits, bad and good, that hold us back from moving forward?
Such a good question. Habits don't change overnight. These are not things that you just shed like a fur coat, right? Um, we put it in the answer box again. Keep it in the open until I'm done answering the question, please. So,
We'll do that next time.
okay, thanks. But yeah, it's such an important question. So it's something that we all want to know. Is for our own practical, um, uh, being able to change. I think that it. So I will say answer. There are lots of different ways I can try to answer that question. One is, you know, a lot of people talk about grit, but it's really important to know when something is not serving your growth any longer. It's important to know when to quit, right? Not just know when to grit, but know when to quit. Angela Duckworth doesn't like that expression. She's my friend, and I tell her that. But regardless, we have to know that when in our lives, it's best to, that changing the sail, changing direction in the ocean is going to be what is actually leading us to um, to greater purpose. And many people want to know, well, how do I know uh when that moment is? But when you're in touch with your being itself, like it when you uh are not being like motivated by the deficiencies that want to change direction. The compulsions are different than being, what's being called into the future. So are you being like um, carried into the future in a certain direction, or do you see another island, another designation, and with wonder and awe and excitement, you want to reach that island? And that's an important question to ask yourself. What's the underlying core motive of why you're being drawn to a different direction? It's a great question, Sharon asked, and it's hard to answer in a couple of seconds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hopefully that was
Thank,
helpful.
that was great, Scott. Thank you so much. Going next, I'm going to jump around a little bit between the questions. Armando Beltran asked the question, what do you believe to be true, Scott? Maybe an idea or a hypothesis that most others in your field would disagree with. He's also wondering, he's been listening to your podcast for many years. What would be the top 3 episodes that you would recommend to us after this?
Does Armando want to know about the top 3 episodes of my podcast or top 3 podcasts, like other podcasts? You know what I mean? What do you think?
I think he means your top 3 that we should not
Okay.
miss. Well, you could mention any that you like, plus any episodes of yours that we shouldn't miss.
Okay. What do you believe to be true? Maybe an idea or hypothesis that most often you feel would disagree. Oh, it's such a good question because I'm very interested in thinking about human intelligence, and I get into a lot of debates with people in my field about IQ and whether or not that's the true intelligence. And I just have studied so many amazing people with learning disabilities or some thing that held them back, and trauma or disadvantage. People are physically disabled, and I've just seen too many cases of that being the thing that has fueled their greatness, fueled their intelligence. That I think we need to kind of have a different model of ability. The intelligence field kind of views it in isolation of the rest of the person, like IQ testing and things like that. But I think that we underestimate the extent to which um, disability can actually motivate and lead to extraordinary ability. And that's been a big one in my career that I've been trying to push back against people in my field.
Very nice. Thank you. And we'll circle back around to your recommended podcast episodes and
Oh, I can do
resources.
that. I
Okay.
can do
Let's do it
that.
real
Oh,
quick. And we've got a few more questions. Go ahead.
sure. I want to be respectful of the fact that we have to get other people's questions. So they want to know that my top three episodes. Is that right, Romano?
That's right.
Um, I like Noam Chomsky. I just had Noam Chomsky on, and I enjoyed talking to him. I like Robert Greene, uh, and then I like Susan Cain. I really like Susan Cain. She talks a lot about the introvert advantage. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Scott. Next one from Alberto Martinez. He asks, how could we detect if someone in our network or team or ourselves are in the being or deficiency mood when we're trying to move forward towards a group goal? And how could we help them and ourselves pivot? And this is a great question on, like, it's one thing to implement all these ideas for ourselves. How do we implement it for the groups of individuals that we're responsible for?
Well, okay, I want to read it. Where is it? Who said it?
Second from the bottom.
Uh, how could we detect if someone in our network team, is that the question?
Yeah, how do we detect it? And if
Yeah.
we're the leader, getting everybody to be like forward looking and amped, and other people don't have that mindset, they're more deficiency oriented, how do we switch them from deficiency to being mode?
Well, one way is to identify the extent to which the person is either harmoniously passionate about their work activity in a job context, or they're obsessively passionate about their work activity. And I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review where I kind of did a checklist of that, and I just would like to put the link in because I just think that more broadly that can help answer this person's question. Um, yeah, here we go. I'm just going to put it in the chat window. But psychologists have identified there's a way that you can be obsessively passionate about your work, and you can tell the signs of someone who is like that because they don't disengage in their activity when they should. They have burnout. They work themselves to the ground. They don't tend to have a very harmonious integration, but they don't seem to love what they do. It doesn't seem to be a core part of their identity. Maybe there is a sense that the other areas in their life are being affected. And that all can be contrasted from a harmonious form of passion, which I think is really coming from the being realm of existence. I think we can map obsessive passion in the workplace to deficiency motivation, and we can map harmonious passion in the workplace to the being motivation, to answer the question. And when you're being motivated by your passion in the workplace, it's very clear, what the signs of that are. There seems to be a whole harmonious integration there of it's very part of the person's identity. They aren't just I like doing clerical work, but I am a clerical worker. Or like I not just like I like basketball, but I'm a basketball player. And it's integrated so in a healthy way into one's identity, the work that they do, that it permeates other areas of their lives. There's a whole person integration with it. So I just put in two articles I think will be helpful with that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Scott. That was great. Going next to Carolina Gracia, she asks, how do we teach our kids to grow transcendent in every stage of their lives?
Isn't that a good question?
Yeah.
A lot of it starts, in education early, and getting kids outside themselves in their focus. The thing it's so frustrating is that kids are so focused on standardized tests that we're almost forcing them to be self-focused. Imagine if like there were certain requirements in school, like having the kids do projects. For instance, that's really like this group called the Future Project that I work with, where there's the office of the dream director in the school, and any of the kids can go to the office of the dream director and say, hey, I have this dream of how I want to I have a dream, what I want to do to make the world a better place. And we immediately help them get them there without asking their IQ score first. Or I've often said cheekily, no one should have to have a certain IQ threshold cutoff to make the world a better place. Any child can jump right in regardless of their standardized test score. So I think part of that is just creating a culture. If you're a parent, creating a culture in your home that you reward and value the child's self-transcendent values and goals. Instilling in them, instilling self-transcendent values of benevolence and universal love in the household. A lot of that comes down to values as well, and what do you teach your children that is important. But then when it comes to like the changing the educational structures, I have just so many thoughts on that. And I wrote a book called Ungifted Intelligence Redefined, where I talk about some of that. But I love that question. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Scott. So we've only got a couple minutes left. What I'd love to do
Wow.
is to ask you, the way that you've given us so much to reflect on today, so many valuable insights. How can we support you in return? What are the different ways in which our community can best engage with you, support your endeavors? And if at the end of that, if you could share with us a final call to action for us or a word of wisdom, we'd love to hear that too.
Cool. Well, this has been a really good opportunity. I've really enjoyed this, and I've enjoyed like those are like hard hitting questions. Those are like my Columbia University student questions. Like, oh, okay, um, but I've really enjoyed this opportunity, and I teach an 8-week course where I really try to get people to self-actualize and apply these principles in their daily lives. And I just put a link there in the chat window for that. But also, I just try to offer so many free resources as I can. If you just go to my webpage, you can see there's a lot of all my articles and things are on there. The podcast is on there. Um, basically every week now. Yeah, now we're going weekly on our podcast. There'll be hopefully some new lesson, someone to learn from. Um, I try to put as much free value as I can in the world, and then I have my course, because I have to make a living. But I just subscribe to my newsletter, which you can do just going onto my webpage, and where you can get all these kinds of free updates. And then imparting words of wisdom. Uh, the thing with wisdom, I just want to step back a second and just say, what is wisdom? In answering that question. I view wisdom as this capacity to hold lots of dichotomies that we have in the world in our head and not view them as dichotomies. What Maslow called dichotomy transcendence. You know, we may have many ideas about ourselves, like, oh, there's such a thing as good versus evil. So either that means I'm either a good person or I'm a bad person. Oh, there's so many things in the world like female, male. Oh, I can't have both of these characteristics within. I can't cultivate, the masculine and the feminine energy within myself, and come to a harmonious integration of that. You see politics, you're either a Democrat or Republican, and then we put you in these boxes. You can't pick and choose different policies you like from. My point here is that wisdom is so much about transcending a lot of these dichotomies that we have in our society, and realizing that we're these complex beings going through the world. And at the end of the day, the more we can just get outside of our self focus and look to see what are the needs out there that we can help others, the more we start to kind of transcend these dichotomies. These dichotomies sort of just don't matter anymore. The more that we can integrate our being itself into the world, then we kind of get a sense of oneness, and then the self itself doesn't become important. The self is not the focus anymore, and that's why I don't call it self-transcendence. It's called transcendence, right? The self doesn't need to be part of it. The book's not called self-transcend. The book is called just transcend. Let's transcend these false dichotomies we have, these false narratives that are holding us back about ourselves, and shift our focus to contributing to the good society. So I'll end on that note.
Beautifully said, Scott. I mean, all of your work and all of the wisdom that you share today helps us do just that. Get out of our own heads, focus more on the bigger picture, and apply our strengths and overcome our weaknesses towards a bigger goal. So thank you for being a living example of that in your own journey and all the work you've done. And we all know that you're just getting started despite all the successes and accolades. Excited to see your
Oh,
future successes, and we'll be there with you every step of the way. So thank you, Scott. And thank you,
thank
everybody,
you,
for
Barry.
joining us. My pleasure.
Thank you.
See you again
Thanks,
very
everyone.
soon. All the best. Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Take care.